Hey everyone, this is Bathmetrics, and today we're going to talk about audio editing in the newest version of Bitwig, version 3.2. I'm actually going to break this into several parts because it's a long subject. I could spend more than 2 hours covering the whole thing in one video, and I know you don't want to sit through something that long. So today we're going to cover part 1, which is the big picture stuff. I'm going to specifically talk about the biggest source of confusion for brand new Bitwig users, which is the fact that Bitwig has 2 different containers for audio. I'm also going to talk about another big source of confusion, which is the multitude of contextual gestures that you work with when you're editing audio. For example, wherever I put my cursor on the screen, you see different shapes that appear. And then if you look down in the status bar here, you'll see lots of different hold down Alt to do something or hold down Control and Alt to do something and so on. Those are what I mean by contextual gestures. So we're going to talk about all those in this video. I'm also going to be comparing and contrasting the 2 different editor windows, which are the small event editor window down here and also the big event editor window that you get to this way. So we'll talk about that. And I'm going to show you lots of tips and tricks for zooming in on waveforms and taking a closer look at things. I bet you I'm going to come up with some tips that you haven't stumbled across yourself yet. And finally, in this video, I'm going to talk about some tips and tricks for syncing or synchronizing what you see in the detail view down here with what you see up here. There's some good workflow tricks and techniques that I'm going to talk about. Okay, so that'll probably take us about 20-30 minutes. Buckle up, hang in. The reason I'm doing this audio editing series is actually because of a question I got recently about somebody who wanted tips and tricks for specifically for warping and stretching acapellas on the grid, because acapellas can be notoriously hard to figure out in any DAW, but Bitwig and some of Bitwig's quirks can make it even trickier. But to really talk about how to work with acapellas, I have to make sure you understand all the basics about audio editing and especially a lot of this big picture stuff I'm going to cover in this video. So by the end of this little mini series, I will be specifically talking about acapellas and how to work with them. So let's just jump right into it. The number one source of confusion, let me just grab a random thing here. Let me also make sure this is not going to blow your ears out. I'm just going to grab a random clip, drag it in here. We're not going to need this. So the first thing to understand about audio editing in Bitwig, it's very different from every other DAW in that what you see up here and think of as a clip, an audio clip in every other DAW is actually not where the real audio sample lives. Bitwig has a 2-container paradigm. They have what they call the clip, which is what you see in the arranger or in the launcher. If we copy the same clip over there, these are called clips. But this is not where the sample lives. Instead, the sample actually lives inside something else they call an audio event. And here you can visually see the 2 different elements. This colored bar represents the clip container. And inside a clip container can be 1 or more audio events, which is represented by this second bar down here. Now, the first question you're going to ask is, why the heck do you need 2 levels of containers for samples, clips, recorded audio, bounces, etc.? Why do you need 2 different containers? And the answer to that is because Bitwig has some tricky paradigms. Let's actually, let's do this. Let's get rid of this one entirely. And let's go find a snare. I'm gonna grab any random snare, crappy snare, don't care about it. So typically if you're working with snares, you would be putting them on the the backbeats of every bar, so the 2 and the 4, or if you're working in a dubstep genre, you'd probably just have a snare here on the 3, and you'd be running in halftime, so the kick would be on the 1, snare on the 3, kick on the 1, snare on the 3, and so on. That's a halftime feel. But we'll just assume we're working in common time. And you'd normally have a snare here. And then it's a common trick to do something like go find a crash, any old crash. Let's just take something, gosh, these are all terrible looking crashes, but let's just grab this one. You might do something like take a crash, flip the waveform, maybe shorten it up a little bit, maybe make, a little bit of a fade in, and that's a really long crash. Let's make this even shorter. Fade it in a little bit, right? And you might do something like this, and then you'd want to knock it right up against the snare, like so. And then, you might want to occasionally have, or on every snare, have some sort of lead in that's like a reverse riser into the snare. So in other DAWs, this is typically what you'd do, is you'd make these by hand. And this is a pain in the butt to move around. Like every time I want to, copy this out to another bar, I have to, really carefully select them and then do something like duplicate. Or if I've got other things in the way, there's a lot of potential for somehow getting them out of sync, or somehow accidentally pushing this one into the other one and slightly overriding the other one. And now the snare itself, the actual transient of the snare, won't be hitting on the exact grid line of the backbeat or whatever, right? So there's a lot of problems you can get into when you try to manage a more complex clip like this in several parts on the same track, right? But what if, and this is where Bitwig came up with this idea for a clip container. What if instead of having two completely independent things that they know producers like to usually cram together, what if you could simply have a container in which both of these things could sit and coexist nicely? So let's get rid of this one, and I'm not going to explain what I'm doing here. I'm just going to sort of show it to you, and later we'll get into all the details about what I'm doing here. But what I'm doing is I'm lining up this snare exactly on the backbeat, the second beat of the first bar. And then I'm going to come in here and just really carefully line up this reverse riser into the snare. And I'm actually going to push it slightly into the snare so that I can make a crossfade. And then I'm going, well, I probably don't want a crossfade for this kind of situation. So let's drag the snare back out here. Let's just make it a hard connect. All right. So I've got these lined up so that the snare is always going to hit on the backbeat of the bar, right? And I'm now going to take this, I'm going to take this clip marker and set it up so that the span of the clip is always exactly a half a bar. And you can see that the snare is going to hit right on the downbeat. And what this allows me to do is some really nice things. For one, I can now duplicate this and move this around, and I know wherever I want to go in any bar, like if I want to make that snare hit on the second backbeat of bar 2, all I have to do is snap this thing to the grid, because the whole clip fills exactly one half note, right? That's one trick I can do. I can also use Bitwig's looping feature and just loop this thing out for 2 bars. Right? So this is why Bitwig has the notion of a clip that contains one or more audio events. And what you think of as a clip in every other DAW the thing that holds the sample or the recording or the bounce or whatever. What you think of as a clip everywhere else in Bitwig is not a clip, it's an audio event. It's one of these things that you can only look at inside of the event editor. This window here is called the event editor or detail editor, right? So that's why we have two things. And this one workflow paradigm of Bitwig is very powerful and very flexible, but it is also something that will drive you crazy at first and confuse the heck out of you and is the source of most hair pulling and teeth gnashing and confusion when you're first getting used to the way things work in Bitwig. So once you get over this hurdle, you're going to love it. But until you get over this hurdle, you're going to hate it and you're going to go, why does Bitwig make it so complicated, right? I see that complaint on the forums all the time. Why is it so complicated? Why can't there just be one clip for a certain sample? So let's just really understand that big picture stuff. And I'm in parts 2 and 3 and whatever of this series, I'm going to talk in a lot more detail about working with events and editing events. But just at a big picture level, burn this into your brain. Clips live in events. Or, I'm sorry, samples. See, I even do it. Samples live inside of events. And then events live inside of clips. One clip can contain multiple events, but any one event is only ever one sample each, okay? All right, let's move on to the next big source of confusion that'll get you at first, which is the notion of gestures. Bitwig has a very multi-use kind of paradigm with editing in the arranger or editing anywhere. Everywhere you move your cursor is going to change its shape. Corners, upper corner, edges of things, lower corners, the inside of things, right? And if you look down here on the status bar, you're going to see whenever you've got your cursor sitting over something, there's all these little clues about other things you can try. Like if I hold my cursor here and then I just simply hold down the Alt key, see how my cursor changes shape? And now this lets me slide the waveform back and forth, right? What I'm really doing under the covers is sliding the event back and forth relative to its parent container, but up here it just looks like I'm sliding the audio inside the clip, right? So that is a gesture too, where I hold down a modifier key to change the cursor shape. So clue number one, the big picture thing to really drive home. There's always two types of gestures. Some are positional, like these. Some of them are triggered by modifier keys, and those modifier keys are always some combination of Control, Shift, and Alt, right? So Alt does something in this case. Control doesn't. Well, it changes it to just a pointer cursor. Shift isn't really doing anything in this particular case, but if I'm working in another part of the window, Shift might be doing something different, Control might be doing something different, a combination of Control and Alt might do something different, and so on. So the main thing I want to train your brain about right now at the big picture level is be aware that some gestures are you can only find them by moving your cursor around and investigating with your cursor. Okay, and every shape means something, and you have to teach your muscle memory what the shapes mean. Like this shape means I can extend the right edge of the clip container. I can make the clip container longer. But the audio event inside still stops right here. This is just dead space. Maybe I could put another audio event in there. Maybe I could slice this audio event like so. I could take a chunk of this audio event and dupe it over into, well, let's slice it first. Actually, let's do it this way and dupe it over this way here. And then, see, I wanted to dupe it, so let's undo that. Let's just do a slice first and then copy drag it over, right? So you can do something like that. By sliding the clip container out, I made room to do other interesting things with the same event or other different events inside that one clip. This gestures drags out the other edge, and I'm making room on this side now. See how you actually see the visual space down here? And I could do something like, again, I could copy this one over and slightly overwrite the start of this, and you can do all kinds of crazy things like that. So every gesture means something. This gesture loops, but we'll get more into what all the different gestures mean in a subsequent video. For now, just realize 2 gestures, 2 different ways of getting them, positional versus modifier keys. All right, let's move on, clear everything out. The next thing that is worth understanding is that there are 2 different editor windows. Let's get another sample up here real quick. So one editor window, the obvious editor window, is this little button down here, show the detail editor panel. There's a shortcut key for that. That's a system default shortcut key. It's the E key on your keyboard. So if I tap E, and since I have this clip selected, it's showing me this clip in an editor window. If I were to drag in a different clip onto a different track with a different color, and I click this one, the editor window jumps to that point and so on. And kind of where it tries to center wherever your cursor, your playhead cursor ends up, it tries to mostly more or less center that in the window down here. So for example, if I zoom in a little bit and click, see how it sort of repositions down here? We'll talk about this in a minute. But the point is, the editor window always reflects whatever you've got focused up here in the arranger. Or, again, if I've got these in different clip slots in the launcher, it's the same thing up here. If I click this clip in the launcher or this clip, it's always trying to show me the detail of whatever I have selected in this type of sequencer or this type of sequencer. All right. Now there's another type of editor window. If I just make that go away, you can select a given thing, and then this thing here called edit is, I call it the big editor, right? This is like the detail editor panel or the small editor. And then this thing, which also has a keyboard shortcut. The keyboard shortcut is Shift Tab. So hold down Shift and tap your Tab key. This brings up the big detail editor, and I find this is much more useful for MIDI editing than it is for audio editing, because I don't usually need to see a huge freaking waveform like this for audio editing. The main advantage of this big editor, the main advantage is that it gives you access to track level automation. So I could add track level automation lanes here, and those are always in a blue color, or I could click the clip itself, or is it the audio event? Clip. How do I get to the damn, I do this. Or I could go into clip mode, and this red colored automation lane is linked to the clip itself and not to the project's audio tracks. It's actually part of the clip itself. It's a property I could save with the clip if I save the clip over in my clip library. And those automation lanes are red colored, and the automation capabilities for a clip are actually far more interesting and complex than simple track level automation. So the main reason, if you're ever going to use the big editor for audio, it's mostly maybe to let you get to the clip level automation. This is the main reason I would use this window, because it's a little harder to get to this type of automation in the other editor. And let's see if I can demonstrate that. So if I double click this clip again, see how there's nothing down here that looks like automation? There's no automation baked into this window. Instead, there's a separate automation editor. And here, again, you can get to the track level or clip level automation, but it's a whole separate editor. And sometimes it's useful to see them in an all-in-one view together like this, so you can, whatever. So I don't find this big editor super useful for audio. Let me show you briefly how it works for MIDI, because you'll see instantly why it's much more useful for MIDI. Let's add a new MIDI track. Let's just add an empty clip. So by default, when you're editing MIDI, it uses the same event editor window or detail editor. And if I put in some notes, right, you can zoom, you can do all that stuff. But it's this narrow, restricted view, and especially if I want to turn on my, note expressions like for velocity, timbre, etc., and adjust velocity of notes, right? It's a very cramped little view. So for MIDI in particular, I like to use the big view because it gives me a lot more room to work with the piano roll. It gives me a much bigger view of my expressions that I might be manipulating, right? And it also gives me an automation lane again. Uh, and again, you have track level automation and clip level automation for MIDI clips as well. So, and especially if I close the bottom panel entirely, you have a whole lot of room to work with. This is great for the piano roll, much more room to work with. So I find myself using, for MIDI clips, I tend to use this editor. And for audio clips, I tend to use this editor. Okay, so the last, no, there's two more things to cover. So now we're going to talk about zooming in on waveforms. Almost everyone quickly learns about the one zoom key that's available, and it's available by default. It's called Z. All right, it's your Z key on your keyboard. If I select this clip and I just tap Z, it instantly zooms this panel, this arranger window. It zooms it in on the full length of the clip. And if I tap Z one more time, it zooms back out to the full span of my entire project. Okay, so if I have a whole bunch of clips in here, let's just dupe out a whole bunch of these clips. And you can see now that I've got them like this. And let's even go a step further and drag some of these way out over here. Okay. If I come back to the beginning and I select this clip and I zoom in on it, and then I press Z to zoom out again, it zooms way the hell out because it's the Z key by default is always 2 different degrees of zoom. It's whatever you've got selected and zoom in on it, or it's the entire project. So the Z key becomes less and less useful the more built out your project is, right? Because you're always going way the hell out to this view. And a lot of times when you're working, you want to work in a much closer area and you want to kind of stay locked in here. And if I zoom in on this waveform, or even better, a specific part of this waveform like so, and then I zoom out, I do not want to go back to this view, right? That's frustrating as hell. I want to go back to the zoom I was originally at, which was something more like this. So here's a tip a lot of you probably haven't run into yet. If you go to settings and you go to shortcuts, we're going to collapse all these shortcut lists, and you do that by holding down your shift key while you click one of these little triangles, and it's going to collapse all of the folders, right? Otherwise, if I click that one, it collapses only that one, and then I have to do them all one at a time. No, you can just hold down shift and collapse all of them. And that shift paradigm works in a lot of places. It works over here in the browser as well. Like if I just close this, that's the only folder I've closed, right? But if I grab this one and hold shift, I close everything. And now this is my full first level of all my sample locations. And then I can, expand into any one I want, go even further. No, that's as far as that one goes. Let's go to my sample lib. It's much bigger. Wait. Where am I? Oh, because I'm searching, of course. So it's filtered down. So, let's say I'm way in deep somewhere like this, right? And then I decide, you know what? I want to just get all the way out to the top level. I can come up here and hold shift and do that. So this is a useful paradigm. Back to the settings though. Down here, if you look closely, you'll find a category called zooming. If we look in here, here's the Z key and its default behavior. There's a couple other options that are worth investigating, but the main one that's unmapped by default is called zoom to fit selection or previous, right? and I mapped mine to Shift Z. So it's Z and Shift Z. That's easy to remember. My hand's right there. It's easy to get to. So I recommend really strongly that you map this to Shift Z, right? Now what that allows you to do is, I'm already zoomed in like manually. I'm zoomed into this level of detail in my project. And I want to look at this transient. So I highlight this section of time and I press the Z key. And now I'm looking at the detail for that transient. Now, if I press Shift Z to go back out, it just goes back to, oh, damn it. Let's try that again. You have to press Shift Z to get in as well. My bad. So if I want to look at this close up and I do Shift Z to zoom in, and then I do Shift Z again, I come back out to the same level of detail I was at, right? Let's get a slightly different view here and let's look at this tail. Shift Z to zoom in, Shift Z to come out to the same level I was at. Now again, compare that with Z to zoom in and then Z to zoom out. See the difference? So map that key. Start using that key. Start getting the habit of using Shift Z almost more than you use Z itself. Like if I'm in here looking at two different clips side by side and I want to go into some zoom on this, I do Shift Z and then I do Shift Z again and I'm back to here. And this works everywhere, even down in the editor. Let's say I really want to zoom into some detail on this portion of the waveform. So I select a section of time and I do Shift Z. And now I'm looking at it in a much more close-up view. And if I do Shift Z, I come back to right where I was. But if I'm here and I want to look at, this section of the wave and I press Z by itself, and then I press Z again, I've lost my context. See, it's everything, right? Even if I'm in clip mode, where I'm looking at just the one specific clip that I have highlighted, and I come in and I look at a tiny part of this waveform with Z, and then I press Z again to go out, it takes me back out to the whole clip. But again, what if I'm zoomed in really close on the transient? And what if I'm looking at this and I go, I wonder, is something about that transient's bugging me? Am I really at a zero crossing at the start of the sample? So I select a little slice of time and I do Shift Z and I go, yep, I can see it starting at a zero crossing. Okay, that's cool. And I do Shift Z again and I'm back to the same level of zoom I was at before. So big picture stuff, super useful. Map your second level of zoom. Start using that second level of zoom even more than the regular one. Sometimes it's useful to do, ZZ to just see your whole project. Sometimes that's useful. I find it not that useful most of the time. So the next thing to talk about is how we synchronize what you see up in one of the sequencers. So this is the arranger sequencer, the linear timeline. This is the clip-based sequencer, or the launcher is what Bitwig calls it. There's always a bit of synchronization. Whatever you select up here is what gets its focus down here. Okay. And there's a few tricks beyond just the simple, like I've selected this or I've selected this or this, right? You'll notice when I select some of these, like when I select this one, I'm zoomed in pretty far on the waveform inside this clip. Here's my event right here, and you can clearly see it goes off the edge of the screen. But if I click this one, I'm seeing the entire clip and the entire event inside the clip. Why do I have these two different levels of zoom depending on which one I click? That's because the event editor is semi-independent, right? It'll remember its zoom independently. So for whatever reason, I was zoomed into here the last time I looked at this clip in the editor. But this clip I haven't gone into recently, and the last time I did, I was zoomed in pretty far, so it just remembers that. So how can we show, what are some ways to quickly synchronize and change what I'm looking at? So tip number one, if you double click in the header bar where the title of the clip is, if you double click up in this top row, it will zoom the event editor to the full span of the thing you double click on. Watch. Double click, and now I'm seeing the entire event and the entire clip. That's where the clip ends, that's where it starts. Okay. And likewise, you know, if I zoom in again and then I double click, right, it just automatically zooms you out. So that's a really quick way to zoom out. There's another way you can do it. You don't have to go all the way up here. I could be way down deep in here. Now this is going to be a little tricky. This is where we get into some distinction and confusion about audio events versus clips. I'm in the launcher, and the launcher doesn't have a notion of multiple clips in the same area, right, on the same track like these two here. It's just one clip at a time. So it's always showing me everything from the audio event and the things inside the audio event. These are called, what do they call these in Bitwig? Expressions. These are all called expressions in Bitwig. We'll get into that in a later video. So I might think, well, what if I double click on the event header down here? Well, if you double click, you're going to split the event, which is really, I think, bad. Bitwig, it's bad. Don't do that. Be consistent. So I'm going to Control Z to undo that. However, if I'm in the clip here, I'm over here in the arranger now, and so because I'm in the arranger, I was last looking at it in clip mode, but if I were looking at it in track mode, and I double click the clip header, again, it's always about the clip header. If I double click this bar right here, it's going to zoom out to fill or the entire span of my editor window with the full length of the clip. Same thing here. Here I'm zoomed in a little too far, like there's some off the edge here and there's some off the edge here, but if I double click this, or if I double click this, it's going to pull everything in so I can see this entire single one clip in my editor. Let's say I zoom in manually and I'm in track view, so I'm seeing all the clips on this one track. If I double click this one clip, it's going to expand it out to show just that one thing here. So, okay, so this is one thing to remember. You have to know whether you're in a clip editing mode or a track editing mode, because this double click trick only works when you're looking at the entire track and you can see the clip bar. The clip, they call this the alias for the clip. This little thing is the alias, and this up here is the header. So if I'm zoomed in and I double click a header, it's going to zoom this in, right? If I'm zoomed in and I double click this alias for the clip header, it's going to zoom in. It's always about the clip level. Now I can't see the clip level alias if I'm in clip mode, because if I'm in clip mode, it's just starting inside at the audio event, and there's no easy way to, like, you know, jump out. Okay, so you're going to have to manually zoom if you are working inside clip mode and are really truly only looking at and operating on a single audio event inside of a single clip. Doesn't matter what that clip is, right? Any one of these. If you want to zoom out when you're in this mode, like if I'm zoomed in far and I want to zoom out, I just need to double click the clip up here. Okay, so that's a quick shortcut. Again, you can also do this where you put your cursor in here somewhere and do Z. Z is another way to zoom out to see all. Again, since I'm inside a single clip, everything zoomed to all in this context means just the contents of this one clip, just the one. If there were multiple audio events in here, like let's take this crash and let's edit it real quick. And let's drag in the border of the event. And let's drag in something completely different. Let's bring in a kick of some sort. Now you see I couldn't drag this in here directly, right? This is another part that's confusing. Or is that there? That actually might have dragged in. Let's find a different kick somewhere, something longer. those are loops. I don't want to loop. No, no loops, no loops. There we go. Okay, it did work. Whatever that sample was, it was a really tiny, tiny thing. So now I have a crash that's been cut short. I have a kick. They're all inside a single clip. So again, if I zoom in really far on the clip editor, and then I want to zoom out, I could either double click this, or I can come in here and just doesn't matter where my cursor is, right? It doesn't matter what I'm doing. If I tap the Z key one time, I'll see the entire single clip and all of the events inside it. So all, right? If I want to zoom in on this kick, if I do Shift Z and then Shift Z, I can come out to here, right? If I zoom in more and I do Shift Z and Shift Z again, see it keeps that same context as before. So you just have to learn your way around the zooming, the shortcuts for zooming. This is another shortcut for zooming that sort of centers everything inside of the editor, regardless of what type of clip it is. And then again in track view, if something's a little off center, just double click it up here, right? Or again, if something is way off center, you could double click this. Double click the clip header, whether it's the alias here or here. Another thing that's really useful. Now this is where things get really fun. If I am in the arranger view and I want to say, what's going on with this kick here? And I do that, watch what happens down in the editor. See how, regardless of what I select, it will automatically zoom into the time selection down here. If I want to look at just the transient and of that one kick and the end of the other kick, see how it just zooms in and I see the end of the other kick and the start of this kick right here. If I want to look at, you know, the tail of this sample, I can just do that much. And now I'm right here. So this is really super useful, that you can be looking up here and pick a thing you want to look at more closely and boom, there it is. And then if you want to jump out again to the whole waveform, for example, you could just double click here. Likewise, if I'm zoomed way in like at the front of this crash, but then I jump my cursor up here to like here, see how it just automatically snaps over to here? And my playheads are both aligned pretty much right in the center, right? If I click here, it jumps over to this part of the waveform. If I click here, it jumps over to the tail. If I click here, it jumps right over to this spot. If I select a bigger span, it jumps, okay? Really useful tricks. Get used to doing this. It'll make your audio editing go way, way, way faster. And it kind of operates in reverse, but not quite so well. If I'm in this clip, for instance, and I set my cursor here, or I do this, see how nothing here updates? It's kind of one way. It's kind of from your big view to your detail view is where you get this level of synchronization. Okay, so this is a really good shortcut for getting right down to the thing you want to mess with and adjust. Find your context here, zoom in and out here however you want. Maybe be zoomed way in and say, let me work on this chunk of my waveform. And boom, you can get right there to work on it. All right, I think that's it for all the big picture stuff. We've gone 38 minutes. Well, there you go. Part 2, we'll talk about something new and different. See you there. Bye.